Welcome to September or slash end of August developer ecosystem meeting. So fairly light agenda today. Just mostly want to discuss some progress that we're making towards 3.0. I want to talk about some tweaks that we've had to make to the exchange contract, some values that we want to set for the deployment parameters of the staking contract, recap the current timeline for version 3.0, and then talk about a few ZEIPs that have a lot in common, and then finally take questions from the audience. Also wanted to give a great a shout out to a few great community members who've been answering a lot of questions in Discord, as well as working on their own 0x related projects, and I think they all deserve some recognition. So Craig from 0x Tracker, Zhao from VeriSafe, and Joshua from Bamboo Relay. Thank you so much for being an awesome part of this community. Cool. So let's jump into some tweaks that we've had to make to the exchange contract. So the code size of the exchange contract was getting too large, and we were literally unable to deploy the contract. So we actually discovered that there's this old EIP that puts a cap on the size of a smart contract, regardless of if you have enough gas to deploy it within a single block. So we were not bumping up against the gas limit. We just literally could not deploy this contract because it was too large. So we had to remove a couple functions from the interface, as well as just kind of consolidate some of the code into more external functions. So fill order no throw became an internal function. This was primarily used in combination with like batch fills and market fills. And honestly, I can't really think of a good reason that someone would want to use it by itself. We also looked at some data, and for example, in the 2.1 contract that's currently deployed, fill order no throw has literally never been used except with those other functions. So hopefully that's not too controversial. The get orders info function has also been removed. So this was kind of the batch version of the get order info function. And we looked at the data on this one again, and it turns out it has literally never been used in a smart contract call in all of its existence. So hopefully removing this is not too controversial also. This is fairly easy to implement within our developer tools smart contract that we already have. Actually, we already use something pretty similar to this, so I don't think anyone's going to really miss it. You could still do batch order validation with a single RPC call. A few smaller public functions were made internal. Yeah, just really small things like the version of the contract and the name of the contract. Hopefully no one will really miss these things. And then finally, we were considering removing the batch fill orders function. We had a discussion last meeting about removing the market buy and market sell functions, which we actually did end up doing. So now there's only a fill or kill version of those and a no throw version of those. I kind of feel similarly about batch fill orders. Personally, I don't see a great reason to use it, and would almost always use one of the other two derivatives of it. That being said, looking at the data, it does seem that people are actually using batch fill orders a little bit. So probably going to leave it in. It's in there right now. But if we are having more issues with the code size of the contract, this might be the first thing to go. Curious if anyone has currently using batch fill orders right now. Or if anyone feels it's necessary to keep in.
This is Andrew from blockchain or etherblockchain.io. We do use batch fill orders. We use fill order no throw, and we use get orders info for sure.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But here's the thing, you mentioned there is a way to get this information, or at least get orders info another way. Then that's fine. It'd be good to have it in this context to say we're getting rid of the get orders info, and here's what you can do instead. Or maybe that's documented somewhere else. It'd be helpful. But yeah, we are using the fill order no throw. We're using batch fill orders and batch fill orders no throw.
You're just using single fill order no throws?
We have a contract that will execute all of those functions. So all being the fill order no throw, the fill order, and the batch fill order, and batch fill orders no throw.
Okay. Interesting. Wow, you hit all three of them. So yeah, get orders info. I'm assuming you're not using that within a contract. Is that correct? You're
Correct.
Just using that for validation. Okay. So yeah, there's definitely a better way to do that, and we'll have documentation around that before 3.0 is released for sure.
Great.
For fill order no throw, the reason I say there's never a real reason to use it in isolation is because there's basically a better way to do it within Solidity if you're calling it from another contract, where you could just like make a call and then catch the error yourself, and it ends up being cheaper. I think this is probably something should write up a ZEIP for and just put that solution in there also, so people could see how you could pretty easily replace it. And it's just using regular Solidity, no assembly or anything like that.
Yeah, so we are using execute transaction, which is also something that got moved around recently. I think it's 7.0. And we are passing in what method we're calling, obviously, right? So that's how it works. And what we're doing is taking a bunch of tokens and executing as much as we can, as many trades as we can. And sometimes when you have enough, the chances are high that one of them will fail and not be fillable. So that's why we'd be using the no throw. So.
But would you need the single no throw for that?
We leave it open to the front end. So I have a front end team that is also implementing some of this. So they might say, yeah, I want to call the order no throw on the front end too. But I guess, yeah, in that context, the way you say that now, yeah, would you want to execute a transaction and not throw it? Like you basically want it to throw and know that it didn't actually fill anyway, right? So I guess that makes sense. So
okay, well, it's good to know that you are using it though, and we'll see. Honestly, I would rather not really make these changes if we don't have to. So there's one other small change that needs to be added to the exchange contract, and we'll see if that changes the code size, and if not, might be able to squeeze this back in. And then Joshua, you said you also use batch fill orders. Would batch fill orders no throw or batch fill or kill orders satisfy the use case that you're currently using this for?
Yeah, it should do. What's the difference between the kill orders one and the one that's not kill?
So the kill one, you just specify how much you want to fill, and it will fail if you didn't fill that exact amount. Whereas the regular version, you might try to fill 10 and it might end up filling 5, and that'll still be successful.
Yeah, it's probably fine then. It was more just As long as it can be controlled, the individual orders, it's probably not a big deal.
Okay. Well, I think it's very likely that one stays in because I think that's probably the most controversial of these changes. Cool. Well, actually, yeah, that was really good feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, Amir, are these notes like that list that you were showing of the proposed changes for 3.0? Are those available prior to this meeting? Because it would probably be a little bit more productive to see that list and then go back and look at code and then really think about what's changing and if it's really applicable or not, or impactful for us.
They were not for this meeting, but yeah, I think it's probably wise to post these slides in advance. And yeah, we used to post the meetings on the forum. I don't know if we've still been doing that recently, but we should probably go back to that and let everyone review the slides beforehand. Cool. So yeah, next thing I wanted to cover was these staking deployment parameters. So I'll dive into each of these individually, so you don't need to memorize the slide or anything. But the gist of it is there are a bunch of parameters in the staking contract. The staking logic as a whole could be swapped out, but then certain parameters can also be upgraded individually if it's just that small piece of logic that needs to be changing. So I want to talk about what these parameters are, why they matter, and why we think these are probably good starting values for them. So alpha is a weighting parameter that will assign some weight to the amount of fees that were collected by you and the amount of ZRX that you are staking, or amount of ZRX staked to you. And these two things are ultimately used to calculate your rebates. So this is the formula. The second bullet, I know it's a little hard to read. This isn't great formatting. But yeah, this is the formula that determines a market maker's rebate. So you take the fees that were collected by a single staking pool, divide that by all the fees collected in the system, take that to the power of alpha, and then multiply that by the total stake for that pool divided by the total stake in the system, and take that to the power of 1 minus alpha. So the original proposal just proposed an equal weight to the fees collected and the ZRX staked. So that would be an alpha of 0.5. There was some talk of potentially increasing alpha a little bit in favor of the fee collection part of the formula, which I'm open to. I've heard alpha values as high as like 0.75, which would imply quite a bit of a higher weighting towards fees. I kind of like the idea of having them be equal to start, though, just given that we don't really know, how behavior is going to change, and I feel like it's easier to adjust up or down once they're equal than if it starts out heavily skewed in one direction. I feel like adjusting it there's more of a psychological barrier there for the people that might be hurt by adjusting it. So curious if anyone has an opinion on this. 0.5 seems like a sane value to me, but be open to increasing that as well. And also, yeah, I should point out that this alpha parameter will be upgradable. The asset proxy owner is going to be in charge of upgrading the staking contract, so all these changes will have to go through a 2-week as well. And yeah, ideally, we'll create a ZIP with all these initial parameters as well, so people could review and comment there. The next parameter is the length of an epoch. So fees are collected and paid out on a per epoch basis. So at the end of every epoch, it's going to look at all of the fees collected during that epoch, all the ZRX staked during that epoch, and it'll calculate the rebates for that specific epoch. Also, basically any action you take during an epoch will only be applied to the next epoch. So yeah, essentially your actions are kind of frozen during the current epoch. Also, if you are to unstake your ZRX and withdraw, you have to wait for an entire epoch to pass. So we need to decide how long a single epoch should be given all these factors. We're proposing 2 weeks long for the following reasons. First of all, 2 weeks is long enough to encompass an entire vote for anything. Our votes up until now have been 1 week long. So this implies that an epoch should be at least 1 week long as well. People will be able to vote with their staked ZRX, and the balances during that epoch won't be able to change. So that's one nice aspect of it. Also, finalizing an epoch that is calculating all the rewards for each individual market maker is fairly gas and computationally expensive. So that is one factor in favor of having less frequent epochs and making this a little bit longer. That being said, if epochs are too long, it's not great UX because you might take some action within the staking contract and have to wait 4 weeks or something for that to take effect. And yeah, it's just a trade-off, right? You do end up with your stake locked in for longer, which arguably aligns incentives a bit better. But you can see why we don't really want epochs too long or too short. I think 2 weeks feels like a reasonable number there as well. I will say I don't think the epoch length should be upgradable unless the entire staking logic contract is swapped out. It just gets pretty complicated if you're changing the length of an epoch while people are already staking. You could end up with some unhappy people as well if they sign up for 2 weeks and then the length of the epoch gets increased to 4 weeks or something like that. People, you don't want to lock up people's funds longer than they signed up for. Yeah, curious if anyone has any thoughts on this.
So my first thought on both the epoch length and the alpha value, wouldn't it make sense that upgrades to those values, if they're going to happen at epoch boundaries? So I could see you could increase an epoch length, but you would want to do that at an epoch boundary rather than having the epoch length change in the middle of an epoch.
In theory, that would be great, but I think in practice it's kind of hard because someone would need to call the smart contract at the exact right moment. There's not really a transition period between epochs. It kind of just you're able to finalize it once it's over, and then it'll automatically move on to the next epoch. So yeah, if there was some specific time period in between epochs where you could upgrade the parameters, that might be ideal. But at this point, we're just trying to simplify the contracts as much as possible, I would say.
Sure, that makes sense, and less error prone that way. Yeah, I guess if I were thinking about it, I would probably queue things up to happen during the finalization process. But yeah, no, I appreciate keeping it simple too.
Cool. So there will also be a minimum stake size. So as I mentioned in the last slide, finalizing an epoch is pretty gas intensive. So in order to prevent people from spamming or griefing the finalization process, there has to be some minimum stake amount. You don't want people staking like 0.00001 ZRX and then just paying way more than that in gas to finalize the rebates for that tiny pool. So what we're currently thinking is that you'll be allowed to stake any amount, but your stake just won't count unless it is over this amount. The value of this could still be fairly small. We're thinking 100 ZRX right now, which is, I don't know, it's like $16 or $17 worth right now. Yeah, this is not to increase buy pressure for ZRX or anything like that. This is literally to prevent spam. So we ideally want this to be the smallest possible value that would accomplish that goal. Should the minimum stake size be upgradable? Yeah, I don't see an issue with that. I don't think it should really mess with the accounting much. I guess maybe there are some edge cases where some people may have thought that their ZRX counted, but if the minimum gets adjusted up, their ZRX may no longer count. So that could be a potential issue. It might be wise to have some sane boundaries. Obviously, the minimum probably depends on the price relative to the gas costs of finalizing an epoch. But in general, yeah, does anyone have any thoughts on this minimum value? The protocol fee multiplier is the fee that is charged, or sorry, the protocol fee is charged on a per fill basis or twice for a match orders call. And the protocol fee is calculated by the transaction gas price times the protocol fee multiplier. So we're talking about setting the protocol fee multiplier to the rough average gas cost of filling a single order. I think that's somewhere between 120 and 150,000 gas. So we're, thinking in that same range for the initial value of this. I personally like 150,000. I think it's closer to the actual average. I don't have those numbers in front of me right now. Also, gas costs are probably going to go up a little bit post hard fork, although we haven't done any rigorous benchmarking on that. But there are a few very commonly used opcodes that are, well, there's one very commonly used opcode that's quadrupling in price after the next hard fork. There is an offsetting factor there in that call data of a transaction is going down by a lot. So maybe those two things net out to roughly zero, and gas costs won't be changed that much. My hunch is that they will go up a little bit after the hard fork, and this will be closer to the average. Also, just generally, if you're using any of these other decentralized exchange protocols, or if you're using like a margin trading platform, gas costs are already very high. I think they can, be anywhere from like 500 to like 1.5 million gas. So when you're interacting with, multiple smart contracts at one time, I think this multiplier actually becomes much less of a factor for people. And honestly, I think people are going to be pretty indifferent to it. But again, this is an upgradable parameter, so this can always be adjusted up or down as needed. This might have a larger impact for things like non-fungible tokens, given that those tend to be of smaller US dollar size. Curious if anyone has any thoughts on this value.
When you talk about adjusting it, if this value changes, how are people going to determine what they need to send in terms of ETH in order to pay this? Is there going to be a call that they can make to say, hey, I'm about to do this, how much am I going to owe? Or are they expected to know based on looking up this value and multiplying it by the number of orders they're about to execute?
So they should look up this value. They should know the gas price of the transaction they're about to send, and they should know the amount of orders that they're planning on filling. So you could calculate the fee from there pretty easily. And then also this value, at most can only change once every 2 weeks, and probably much less than that in practice. So you're not going to need to look up the value every time. You could pretty much just, hard code that in or whatever.
Yeah, no, I'm just imagining it hard coded into a contract, and then it changes, and then they can't update the contract. So
that's a good point. I would say a contract probably should have some way of changing that. I mean, I think that's a bit of this same problem with smart contracts in general. Like, there are probably people out there who, have some contract that's pointed at the Exchange 2.0 contracts, and when V3 comes out, they might have to completely write that contract if they have upgrade logic in there.
Oh yeah, I think in this case where it's going to be the same contract, I think it makes sense to make sure that documentation is as clear as possible that this is a value that is subject to change, and let people know where they can find the value.
Yeah, this will all be laid out in the spec. Also, the way the contracts are written, if you send too much Ether into anything, it'll always refund you the excess. So probably better to do that in general.
Yeah, with MetaMask and some wallets in general, users can go and override the gas price, which is probably going to cause issues with this.
I think it's also worth noting that this can be paid in WETH, which is handled a little bit differently, and you actually won't need to send any WETH, obviously. So provided that you've approved our asset proxy, that will just get handled seamlessly by the contract.
Yeah, there are a lot of mechanisms to kind of protect against people sending in the wrong amount. So one is refunding any excess Ether that's sent with the transaction. Two is falling back to WETH if there's not enough Ether. And then also, we are aware of this MetaMask issue where a user can manually change the gas price. And at that point, our libraries would no longer have access to it. So we actually created an EIP for a new RPC call where you would specify the upper and lower bounds of a gas price, and they would have to be frozen in that range. I think this applies to a lot of applications that are not just 0x. There are a lot of applications, for example, that have gas price limits on things to prevent front running. So I think Bancor and Kyber both do this, for example. So I think they would probably benefit from this EIP as well. Realistically, probably takes a good amount of time for an EIP to get finalized and implemented and everything. But hopefully that does end up going through at some point. Wish I had remembered about that EIP. Maybe we could look it up and post it later. All right, so this one is a little bit harder to explain without really knowing the underlying mechanics of the stake contract. But I'll try to explain it as best as I can. So, oh, nice. Joshua posted EIP 2250 is the EIP that has the gas boundaries included. Anyways, yeah. So I'll try to explain this as best as I can. So the way staking works is typically a market maker would create a staking pool, and then people delegate to this pool. Alternatively, the market maker can also add addresses to this pool. And the way this is intended to be used is that, you know, the operator of a pool and the market makers in a pool are really all the same user, but there might be, you know, there are a lot of reasons why you might want to market make from a handful of addresses rather than just a single address. But ideally, we would like, you know, the market makers in a pool and the people delegating to that pool to be very separate from each other. So the reason this is important is because once you delegate your vote to a pool, you are giving 50% of your voting power to that pool. So, you know, if you are that's why we need a clear separation of delegation versus actually being in a pool. Because if you are in a pool, then you know you might have 100% of your weight assigned to that. We also want people to actually delegate as is written into the smart contract, rather than kind of creating backroom deals with people and becoming market makers in their actual pools. So this kind of prevents people from centralizing around a single pool. What this all ends up meaning is that there needs to be a cap to the amount of addresses that can be registered to a single pool. So we're trying to come up with a sane value for this, but realistically, you know, this should be determined by like the max number of addresses a single market maker might use. It's that number will probably change as time goes on and more tokens become actively traded. I would think right now that's probably something like, you know, 4 or 5 addresses. Maybe they're using one address per token pair or something like that. But you know, that can obviously increase pretty rapidly. So yeah, I don't know if there are any market makers on this call, but yeah, I'm curious what people think is a sane value for this, or if anyone has any questions about it generally. Not sure if I explained that as clearly as I could have.
Yeah, basically, I have a few bots, actually using Hummingbot, running, on both local node and Infura. So testing a bit how it actually works. And I mean, I guess you're pretty familiar with Rigoblock, so it's like token pools and stuff. So I mean, that's kind of bread and butter. There's for sure the need from market makers to actually do that. There's one thing that we've kind of implemented is like it's going to be announced, but it's like we call it self-custody, so that it goes off protocol of smart contract, and it still allows a market maker to make markets in some way. But it would be nice, actually, there's this thing when you're a market maker and you trade through a pool or a smart contract, you have to change everything. So everything has to be made custom. So, I mean, if you want to work on this and we can leverage on the architecture that is already there, or if it can be like the work can be shared so that it doesn't need to be like develop this market making pool application as a standalone or twice. Because I've dealt with most of the APIs and specifications of the relayers, and even though they're similar, you have to do you have to do the validator signature, which not everybody supports. So you have to make sure that they support it when they receive it on the order book. And then basically the relayer has to process on their front end in some way. So there has to be some front end that allows to do that. So there must be an API that the relayer can actually call without having to write too much code. And of course, it's very intensive in terms of resources and time dedicated for the upgrades, because everything has to be custom and some relayers have different specifications. So I mean, it's a huge load of work, and the user experience for the market maker is very different from just trading through a bot on a single account. But that's something that they cannot do as per se, because of the kind of impossibility of segregating the assets and the keys and not having custody.
Yeah.
But I know that I know that that's a very good market fit, because it has been required by bigger market makers as well. It's just that there's not enough demand or traction to actually focus on that, but it's somehow on the roadmap.
How many addresses are you actually using with Hummingbot right now? If you don't mind sharing.
I'm using, I have 3 bots running at the moment, and they're just one public key, if that's what you mean.
Okay, yeah, that's what I mean. Okay. I would think somewhere like, I don't know, I could see this value going up to like 20 or so. And we could also make this upgradable, although I'm wondering how hard it would be to adjust down, if that would break things, or people who already had too many makers in their pool would just be kind of grandfathered in. So I'm guessing this value would probably not be upgradable unless all the staking logic is redeployed. And yeah, something between 10 and 20 seems fairly reasonable to me. But yeah, if anyone has any objections to that, please speak up. Cool. So this other parameter is a weight assigned to delegated stake. So as is, if you create your own pool and stake your own ZRX with that counts as fully weighted stake. If someone comes and delegates to your pool, their stake is only weighted at 90%. And this is to prevent everyone from basically just delegating to a single pool, which ends up creating inefficient economics for the whole system, and also creates some centralization risk. But you can imagine if like every single market maker got together and all put all their money in a single pool, then essentially everyone would be fully staked and everyone would always get full rewards, and it would sort of like net out to zero. So I don't think the weight needs to be very low. I could see this value being like 90 or 95%. If it's too low, then it becomes more expensive for market makers to acquire ZRX or have people delegate ZRX to them. So I think 90% is probably large enough to accomplish what we need here. And I think this value should be fairly easy to upgrade as well. And have anything else? Cool. So this is the same timeline that we shared last month. It's unchanged. So audits are starting in a week. The exchange contract should be deployed to testnets either today or tomorrow, although they might be deployed with the protocol fees disabled for now, because there's some quirks to the fees that rely on some of the staking contract logic. The staking contract is being finalized. I think that'll be done in roughly a week as well, and will be deployed after that. So the exchange pretty much ready to go. Just one PR that needs to be merged, and yeah, staking stuff. Many PRs that need to be merged. We've been heads down committing a lot of code. If anyone is keeping up to date. And then once these things are deployed to testnets, we should also be releasing specifications for both of these things within the next week or so. And then we'll begin to update all of our tooling. If you can't wait to start testing, you will unfortunately need to clone the monorepo, build the 3.0 branch, and use the tooling out of there, because it has not been published yet and probably will not be published until the tooling is in a good state. But yeah, if you just need the auto-generated contract wrappers, you could do that with what exists in the monorepo. You could just import those from the contract packages themselves. Also, I wanted to quickly comment on a few ZIPs that have popped up within the last few months. So Austin created the most recent one, ZIP 51, which is for a price feed asset proxy. And what this suggests is that you might say, I want to sell this CryptoKitty for something that's worth $100. And you don't really know what that something is, but you would use a price feed to determine if the asset is actually worth what you think it is. And then ZIP 48 talks about essentially adding some custom settlement logic into the exchange contract. And then ZIP 43 talks about property-based orders. So this entails, specifying some property of an asset that you want to buy, and then when someone fills that order, they supply the actual asset. It checks that it matches this property, and if it does, it's a valid trade. So all these things, or all these ZIPs, actually have a lot of overlap. So as far as I can tell, first of all, they require that the taker can pass in some custom data into the fill order function, right? Because if I say I want to buy a blue CryptoKitty, the taker needs some way of passing in that, the actual CryptoKitty number, 1,418 or whatever that they want to sell and that satisfies that property. Same thing with the price feed asset proxy. If I say I want to buy something worth $100 and the taker wants to give me ZRX, they need some way of telling the contract that they want to transfer the ZRX. Currently, there's not a great way of doing that. There isn't really room for a taker to pass in any extra data. It's kind of all statically encoded in an order when it is hashed and signed. So this would be any of these would be a pretty big breaking change to the interface. And then there's a good amount of complexity that comes with that as well. That being said, there are already 3 ZIPs that kind of address this issue. So it does seem like this is probably one of the more highly demanded features. And I'm guessing that this would be one of the larger features of the 4.0 contracts. And we're still talking a lot about 3.0, but yes, 4.0 will come at some point. But if anyone has any stopgap solutions before that, I'm all ears. I can definitely think of some somewhat hacky solutions to this that involve like custom signature validation contracts and stuff like that, or like, you know, different types of extension contracts that might allow for this sort of thing. But yeah, I think it would take a fair amount of custom work to accomplish. If anyone has any ideas, please let me know.
Hey, Amir, this is Austin.
Yep.
I just wanted to comment on ZEIP 51. That's not quite what I had intended from the spec. The idea there was that the maker would actually say, I want to either buy this crypto or sell this CryptoKitty for $50 worth of ZRX, not necessarily open-ended. I want $50 worth of some token.
I see.
So that way they are basically pricing in a way that is not subject, that is stable against time. So whatever $50 worth of ZRX happens to be when this CryptoKitty sells, that's what I'm going to get, rather than being able to say I want $50 worth of something. What you mentioned is an interesting idea, and it would be interesting to see if there was a way to do that too. But as I had originally intended it, this price feed could actually be implemented against 2.1.
Yeah, you actually don't need a custom asset proxy for that. You can use the static call proxy that's already deployed today. So assuming the address of this price feed you want to use, you would basically.
Well, except that the price feed changes the amount of ZRX that you would actually transfer. So you could say, whatever $50 worth of ZRX is today at the time that this gets executed. So the static proxy could bind it so that this $50, or this couldn't execute if $50, the price moved too much. But the idea behind the price feed proxy is that yes, it could move, but we're still going to stick to $50.
Okay, actually you're right. That makes sense. Okay, yeah, I'll have to think about this. I actually think that this might be doable with the ERC20 buyer proxy. So this is the proxy that allows you to tap into other on-chain DEX liquidity pools. I think this might be possible. I'll need to think about it. But if not, this is potentially something that could be implemented today. This doesn't actually sound like it would need any extra taker data. It would just kind of refund the difference automatically. I guess you would have to specify the max price in the order, right?
This is the price feed I want to use, this is the token I want to trade, and this is the number of units denominated in the price feed, in price feed terms. And then you could potentially combine that with the static proxy to make sure that you can put an upper or lower bound on what prices would be considered acceptable.
Yeah, I'll have to give the ZIP another read. I clearly misunderstood it. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay, and I'm happy to chat on it sometime.
Cool. But regardless of that, I think we probably will need some way for takers to actually pass in data at some point. All right. So we talked about Asset Swapper in the last dev meeting. So this is a new tool that is intended for kind of consuming 0x orders within other smart contracts. It was already released last month, but we kind of made it more production ready and announced it just a few weeks ago. So you could find more information at 0x.org/asset swapper. There's also this nice table that kind of shows you the volume and the current price and some slippage stats across different protocols for ETH, ETH DAI, ETH USDC, and DAI USDC. Also, just today, we released brand new documentation. This is hopefully a huge improvement to how it was before. You are all probably our prime target for this, so please give it a shot. See if you can break it, see if it's useful to you. It's you can now search the docs, which is I think a really big step up from where it was before, and I think there's some more helpful getting started guides as well. Also, just looks a lot nicer. So yeah, please check that out, 0x.org/docs, and let us know if you have any feedback. Bunch of new resources on YouTube. So there's a video with Clay on automated finance and making DeFi accessible. Clay also interviewed Antonio from DYDX. And then Jason, our legal counsel, did a Decrypting the Law episode on AML in DeFi. And then there's also last month's Dev Ecosystem meeting. There were no questions to us submitted this month, but happy to take any other questions. Awesome. Well, I think by the next dev meeting, we should be pretty deep into the audit process for the 3.0 contracts, and we'll hopefully have some more interesting things to share then. I think generally there will also just be a lot more information out there. Things will be consolidated into a single spec. Hopefully we'll have some tooling up by then, and people can start playing around with the 3.0 contracts then. If there are no other questions, we are running up against the end of our time anyways. All right, we will end it there. Thank you everyone for joining.